Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Shared Voices podcast. We are excited again. We got our friends Rick and Monique in the house, and we're going to jump right back in. You guys were on the last episode where we got to learn more about your guys' CoTherapy for real connections. Your guys' therapy, counseling. What do you guys? Is it called counseling or therapy? What's the difference?
Co-counseling, co-therapy, it's all the same. Co-coaching, it just depends on the level of need. So
Yeah.
co something.
Counseling implies, more therapy. Sometimes people think of, physical therapy or occupational therapy has a different tone to it. So, counseling therapy, we use the words interchangeably, but
Awesome.
Just say we're coming in for something. That's good enough.
Rick's a simple man.
Just keep
say
it
the first letter. He'll be fine with the rest.
it's a co-therapy model.
I need some So in the last episode, we got to hear about your guys' business, your guys' what do you call it? Therapy center? What do you call it?
Counseling
Center.
Yeah.
And it's called Real Connections.
Yep.
And it's right here in the Des Moines area.
Yep.
In Urbandale, is that correct?
Urbandale.
In Urbandale. And you guys, it's kind of unique. You guys have dove into a new world that you started back in 2015, if I remember right, where you guys are doing co-therapy. You guys are married, husband and wife.
Yep.
And you guys do co-therapy with both spouses.
Correct.
And
So when we do counseling, we have two people in the room with a couple. So
Okay, so you'd be you two in the room with the couple, so you got four of you in a room. We kind of covered that last time. And what I love about this is it's different than most marriage therapy, including marriage counseling that I've been through. You guys, it's very unique. If you missed last episode, I would advise you to go back and listen to that. But I want to let you guys know about their organization, Real Connections. Again, they're right here in Iowa. They do not, and don't let this be a barrier, they do not accept insurance because insurance doesn't work with a lot of counselors and therapists, especially doing co-therapy, it sounds like.
co-therapy and 80-minute model. Yeah.
An 80-minute model, but we can't let that be a barrier. We have to invest into our marriages. We have to. A lot of times it's the last thing we put money towards. It's the last thing we make a priority, but usually it's the number one issue in our life.
Yes.
Because if our marriages are not healthy, generally our whole life is not healthy. Because we're compensating for the unhealthiness at home. A lot of times I remember my old marriage, nothing against her, since I was unhealthy. I would drive around for a half hour before I even came home because I didn't want to deal with it. That's no way to live. That's no way for a husband and wife to live. And a lot of times we get in that isolated position to where we don't start investing into our marriages, investing into our kids, investing into what matters most. And we're seeing the suffering from it today. And I think it's powerful what you guys do. So Rick, dive right into that. I see you wanting to say something over there, so hop in.
I mean, look, we all have unhealthy pieces of us.
Yes.
And just because even if a marriage doesn't break apart or relationship doesn't break apart, that doesn't mean that the relationship is healthy. That just means that they value staying together for their own reasons. So even a couple that stayed together 50 years but have spent a lot of that angry, that have just and they didn't want to expose that. They the moment that they stepped outside their front door, they put their smiles on.
Yep.
They smile and nod all day long, and then they go back into their houses and they get back to the fight. And that's what makes therapy so worth it. Is we finally decide that when we step out on our front porch, we don't actually need to smile and nod. We can actually head to somewhere and get the help that we need.
I love it. And Monique, why do so many of us wait till we're in crisis, until the affairs happened, until the addiction has started, before we wait till we're in the middle of a storm before we go and get help? I really believe in 1042. We believe in equipping and being prepared for things. So let's talk about that a little bit.
I really think that a lot of it stems from not wanting to be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about military or first responders, we've got this mindset that we have to put up this face that we've got it all together.
Yes.
And And you do for the shift, you've got to have your stuff together because you don't know what you're walking into.
Correct.
So that's fair, right? So when you come into you don't want to go into therapy where someone's going to ask you to talk about your feelings or have to be vulnerable or
Yes.
whatever, however
Especially
you want to do
guys.
it. Yeah, especially guys. But even the ladies that end up on the force, they've got to have that same, they put up that wall just like anyone else, right?
Absolutely.
So
It doesn't skip sex.
no, it doesn't. And so, what part of the part of therapy that would be really helpful for the first responders is that we give them a safe space to be able to be vulnerable, be real, feel the feelings that they're feeling, thinking the thoughts they're thinking anyway. Like we want them to do that because you can't process something you bury.
Yes.
And if you don't process it, it will come up. Right.
Yes.
It's kind of like, you can push things down for a while, but if you try to push one of those, the beach balls underwater, eventually that sucker's going to pop up and pop out,
With force.
with
And
force.
hit you right in the face.
Right.
Yep.
And wouldn't it be better to have that conversation while it's still just floating on the water versus trying to push it down? And so, counseling can help with that, teach you give you a safe place to do it. And then we can teach you as a couple how to have those conversations so that you're not carrying it yourself. You're not burying it. You're actually we'll teach you how to have those conversations as a couple so that the other person can be a safe place.
I actually don't hate that analogy. What if you could learn not to push that beach ball into the water? And what if you could learn not to have that moment that just hits you straight in the face?
Yes.
And the thing is, we know that we're stuffing it into the water, and we know that we can't hold it down there for a long period of time. And we know that when we let go of it, that thing is going to pop up with such force that you're going to feel it.
Yes.
What if you don't have to have that
Freedom.
freedom?
I mean, it is.
Then you can just play beach ball in the pool, and it's a lot more fun.
And that's what it's intended to be. Let's all be in the pool playing beach ball. That's
Exactly.
fun. That's
Yep.
what it's about.
Yep.
So Rick, you said something before we started recording this podcast. We never script these, but we do talk a little bit. You had mentioned the word practice. And I'm gonna let you dive into that, but my understanding of it is when we go to therapy or counseling, we're not just showing up to check a box. We're not just showing up. We need to take that as practice. And if I'm understanding you right before we started, is that what you mean by practice?
Yeah. Everyone that has been great at anything, especially on the force, you have to be great at a certain number of things, from driving to shooting to negotiation, et cetera, but you don't just, some of you are naturals, but you don't just come up to a scene without having practiced.
Correct.
And you don't just come up to a setting without knowing exactly who to point at, who to hide, what door to open, how to park the car, so you're protected. All of that takes as much practice as I could even imagine.
Yes.
That's what happens with couples too. When they come in, we have about 186 things that
He's been writing them down.
that we could give you. You're not going to practice them all at once, but when you started to dribble a basketball or whatever it is you play, throw a baseball or business, dance, it doesn't matter. When you just started, it comes off pretty clunky. The ball gets away from you, and it gets away from you quite a lot.
Yes.
But as you go, all of a sudden you're dribbling with both hands, and then it's dribbling between your legs, and then but the fundamentals never go away. You can shoot a long three, but you better know how to hit a layup.
Yes.
All those things are really important. So when you come in, you're not just coming in for help with hard things. We're going to send you home with the idea, if we're a team in that counseling room, then we need you to act like a team outside of the counseling room. And what that means is you're going to practice together. You got to wake up in the morning and show up for practice. And you got to get home from work and show up to practice.
Yes.
And that can mean different things on different days, depending on what you've been through. But you still got to be able to show up for practice. And not every one of those practice days are going to go good.
Right.
In my day, it was Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan didn't only have good practice days just because he was the best basketball player in the world. He didn't only have great practices. You don't have to have a great practice day, but the next day can be.
That's right.
As long as you're willing to show up for practice.
Just like your police training or anything like that. You train with your weapon. You train in your car. You're training, and everything. We have to be trained in how to have a healthy marriage,
Right.
because we're not just inherently born with the knowledge of how to have a healthy marriage, especially when you add in the stressors and trauma that comes along with military and first responders.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love that you say that, because Monique, Caitlin Clark, she practices,
Oh yeah.
right? She doesn't
absolutely.
just show up to a game and not practice for a month straight, right? She's practicing all the time. And just like you said with Michael Jordan. And if you notice that they're practicing,
with their team.
they're doing it with their team, and it's led by a coach, a leader, a counselor, somebody to help that.
Yep.
And that's what we need. We need to be able to go into practice and be taught, just like professional athletes do, to be taught so we can practice out how to have a healthy, intentional marriage, and to be able to deal with trauma and the stressors of first responder life through that.
If you want to be a championship couple, you've got to show up to practice. That's just the end of it.
It doesn't just happen overnight.
No.
Mhm.
Well, and we're teaching you skills, right? So just like you were talking about, you got to practice, but you also are taught the skills,
Yes.
right? Someone doesn't just hand you a gun and say, here, learn how to shoot this.
Right.
I mean, usually they're teaching you how to take it apart, how to clean it, how to shoot it, how to hold it, how to hold it in the best way so they don't get kicked back.
Yep.
I mean, there's all sorts of pieces of that, and those are tools. And you need those tools, you need those skills so that when you actually need to use your weapon, you're using it in the best capacity. Well, that's with counseling too. You can read a self-help book, right? You can watch a YouTube video on how to do that.
Yeah.
But there's something different about actually having someone that can hold you accountable, someone that can walk you through the steps for the skill or the tool. And that's what we'll do in your therapy sessions. So we're not just talking about being vulnerable in feelings. We're also talking about, here's a skill. You need to know how to communicate. Here, let's talk about speaker listener. Hey, let's talk about spaghetti and meatballs. Giving you a little bit of a teaser and some stuff you might hear if you come to our office. Yep. But those tools that we give you have to be practiced, because if you just hear about them for 80 minutes during a session and then you never do anything with them,
Yep.
that's not going to help either.
When you're at a scene, you have to know whether you're looking at them or not. You have to know, and you have to trust implicitly that the moves you make are going to be protected by the other.
Yes.
Or the others. And we give all the credence to that. I know a lot of people in the force, they have a lot of respect, they have a lot of love, they have a lot of hope with those people because you've been tested to such a degree and have come through it.
Yes.
And that builds so much trust. But at home, a lot of people are like, yeah, I trust that team, but this team doesn't matter as much.
Right.
This team at home is life or death too.
Yes.
This team we've seen a lot of marriages die because we didn't take it seriously, because we didn't treat it as a life or death situation either.
Yep.
And it's really the place that you're going to be most protected, honestly, is at home. In many cases, some cases are really abusive, and I want to isolate those out.
Right.
You're not going to be safe in those situations. But home is the space where we're supposed to be our safest and our best. But it's at home where we decide not to be, and we
Yes.
want to flip that around.
Isn't it odd that we do that?
Yeah.
And just like you said, when you show up to your counseling session, you're showing up for practice. You're there to be taught. You're not there to to defend yourself. And I know I used to feel like that. I would show up and I'd be so worried about defending myself and my actions and my thoughts. I wasn't even open to being taught, to learning something that I don't know and being okay with. I don't know how to be a good husband right now during this.
And that's I want to validate that, right? Because let's be real, it's always, especially the first few sessions, a little bit harder for people to feel like they can be vulnerable, that they're not going to get attacked, that it's a safe place to be able to be real. Our CoTherapy model does, I think, in some ways allow that a little bit easier than general counseling, that we provide a place that both people are going to feel like they're being heard, understood, and respected. But, defenses are a natural part of feeling like I'm the problem. Well, one of the things that we try to teach our couples is it's not about you.
That's it.
You're not the problem. The problem is the problem. And we need to attack the problem together. That's where that practice comes in. That's where those skills come in. If we can separate what the problem is from the person,
Wow.
then that's powerful, because I'm not the problem. He's not the problem. The problem is the problem. And when we separate it, we can both attack it together with the skills and the knowledge and the abilities that we have at the level we're at.
Wow.
It can make talking about the hard things easier to talk about too, knowing that we're just going to set that out in the middle of the room and say, let's, this was pretty terrible, but because that problem is simply the problem, it makes it a lot more feasible to work on it and make that problem lessen day by day.
You know what I love about that is you are not putting that identity on them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You are not putting that on them. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah. That's our purpose.
Right.
We're human beings, not human doings. So what I did isn't who I am.
That's it. And so many of us think that. And that's why that's why we feel like we have to be defensive. We have to be protective.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you guys, from going to counseling, I still go every 2 weeks. When you go to counseling, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel tension, if you feel like you're being cut, please don't run away from that. Healing comes from working through our uncomfortableness and being willing to put our guard down and our shield down and to be open, honest, and transparent. A lot of us first responders struggle with that.
And that doesn't mean funky things aren't going to happen out in the world too. You're going to have someone's going to make a move, and you're going to view that threateningly.
Yes.
Even the time when you saw somebody who's high on coke and saw a look on their face, you take that home, and your spouse is stressed out from all day with the kids, and all kinds of things happened, and you see a look on their face, and it looks very similar to the scene that you were part of.
Mm-hmm.
You transfer that over to your spouse and interpret it in a certain way. In the end, that stuff is going to happen. We have to understand that just because you're in therapy doesn't mean funky things aren't always going to happen. We have to expect, we've been through some pretty tough things over the last couple of years. All the things that I do to try to deal with some of that, not all of that is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to work every day at trying to become more healthy. And I still do unhealthy things.
Yeah.
We're therapists, and we still sometimes get in conflict. We're marriage therapists, but we aren't perfect.
You're still human.
Yeah.
We're working on healthy things, and I'm working on healthy things from a personal standpoint, but I still do unhealthy things. It's okay that unhealthy things happen, as long as we're motivating ourselves to think in terms of what could life be like if this stuff didn't have to happen all the time.
Yes, I love that. And one of the things I've learned just through going through therapy, and I know I brought it up here before, but it's just important to me because it was a big part of my life, is through therapy is being able to address all the stuff from my childhood that I had no idea was holding me back. And I think with our spouses, when we learn deeply about their childhood and how they were raised, and we learn about why they are the way they are, that's when really powerful marriages come together. When we can have full understanding of each other. It's no longer she's just a pain in my butt every time I come home, and I might yell, and then all of a sudden she gets mad. Well, what you don't know is that for her whole life, her dad yelled and caused trauma, and everything in her life was yelling and screaming. And that when you come home and you have an outburst, she's taking that on, and reliving it. And then if we don't know that about our spouses, then we look at that and get confused. But if we know that about our spouses and we're intentional, and that's something that really sets them back, we can love them in a fresh new way, because we know which areas not to touch. Because us married couples, we know the exact words to hurt each other. We can say one word to each other, and we can cut each other sharper than a sword.
Than anyone else is willing to do.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I know if I wanted to destroy Rick's spirit, I know exactly what I could say and do to destroy his spirit. And that's a powerful weapon.
And it gets used a lot, Monique. It really does.
Unfortunately, too often in our relationships, when we are feeling in chaos, when we are not feeling Like we've got our poop in a group, you know.
I love that.
You know, we
My turd's in a herd. We go on all day.
we could.
Got one, Rick?
I do, but it contains a little language.
All right,
so-
we'll skip Rick. Go
All
ahead,
right,
Monique.
moving back. No, but you know, when we're struggling and we haven't dealt with our own stuff, right? We will use that as we call it a shield against. It's not a shield protecting, it's a shield against. It becomes a weapon instead of a shield. And you know, I grew up in a house where my dad did yell a lot, and so I thought that was okay. I took the other approach, right? So since my dad yelled, that's how he got his power. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Rick grew up in a house where his mom yelled a lot and never said sorry. So when I would yell, he would expect me not to say sorry. So he would try to resolve the situation as soon as possible. And I needed a cooling off period. So learning those things about your spouse too, like what do I need to get to a better space when I'm feeling, when I'm feeling stressors, when I'm feeling cortisol hit, and what does he need when that happens? And how do we get the couple on the same page? Because every couple's different. The way you and your wife handle things are going to be different than the way Rick and I do. We can have similar pieces to it. So we teach the general skill, but we say, you need to make that model work for you. And this other couple needs to make that model work for them. And this couple over here needs to figure out if that model works for them.
I love that. It's not one shoe fits all.
No.
And I feel like a lot in previous generations, it has been a one size fits all for therapy and counseling, it felt like. And I feel like that's changing to where it is more individualized per the person, what they're going through based off their childhood or whatever it may be. And, you know, when it comes to talking with our spouse about our past or things that we maybe shared with nobody, getting able, when we share those things that you would tell nobody, and most everybody knows what I'm talking about, we don't share those a lot of times with our spouses because we think, or our loved ones, we think, if I tell them this, Rick, then they're not going to love me. Or if I tell them this, Monique, then they're not going to love me. So we hold those secrets back. And then sometimes those secrets are trauma, things that happen to us, things that we're kind of ashamed of or feel, guilty about.
And that keeps the relationship at a distance.
Yes, there's no true relationship there, honestly, because there's a barrier.
Right.
So talk about that. How can a couple be, and there's hard stuff to talk about. People have been raped as kids. People have been abused. People have been, given chemicals. A lot of bad stuff happens to children. And a lot of things happen to our past from people who maybe we love that are not any fun to talk about. But I really think if I'm holding on to something that's very traumatic from my childhood, whether it's in a sexual assault, whether it's, abuse from a parent, whatever it may be, if we're holding on to that and we're not sharing it with our loved one, it can definitely become a barrier that can cause like scarring to continue to grow to where they kind of grow apart from each other. But it's hard to talk about that tough stuff, which is why it's important to maybe not have that conversation over dinner. Maybe not go to the bar and have some drinks and have that conversation. Let's do it in a counseling session to where it's safe. And those things can come out and truth can be spoken to them by the counselors. And you can get healing and get down to the roots as opposed to just the superficial things that we see in one another.
There are a couple of things in that we don't want to follow our couples home to their home.
That'd be weird.
That would be a little weird.
A little awkward.
It's probably been known to happen, but not from us. So we want you to go home and be able to know how to talk about hard things. Part of the questions that we've had for each other and for others is, why are we so afraid of our stories?
Yeah.
Hard things are difficult to talk about, but sometimes our story can matter to other people. Sometimes our stories can be so powerful in helping people understand. Some of those barriers to coming into counseling are the things like, they'll never understand my story. They'll never understand what it means to hurt in this way. They've never experienced this kind of trauma before, or they want to hide from their problems. There are all kinds of barriers to therapy, but one of the prime ones are fear. And sometimes we have to help couples reframe, or help an individual reframe their story, reframe their personhood to such a degree that said, you know what, I know this is horrible. Not long ago, somebody talked about his story for the first time in years, and he had only told a small, tiny handful of people, and he just started to sob, unexpectedly sob.
Mm.
But by the end of that session, he had softened,
Yeah.
and it was noticeable. I just think, the question, what if you could experience some of that softening? It might harden back up again, but then we'll be able to tell the story a little bit more. And the more people that we can be able to tell our story to, the softer we get and the more help they get.
Amen.
And the better they're going to be able to live their lives. What if we could live our lives forward instead of creating such this closed stance, is what we call it. Defensiveness and offensiveness are forms of closed stances. We want to keep you away. If you have an offensive line and a defensive line on the football field, it looks very similar. They're both beating the crap out of each other and pushing each other off, and it looks offensive. So we call that closed. It's used to protect you away from the things that matter the most. But that open stance creates the potential, an avenue for a river of healing to come into you. And couples, like for us, and a lot of people, 9, 10 o'clock at night is not the time to do it. We're tired. We can get a little cranky. And the kitchen is not the right place for us to do it because there's cooking going on. There's lots of fun, good things happening going on.
There's knives.
There's knives.
No, there is.
Well, there are knives.
But yeah, no.
But great things are happening there. So that isn't the best place for us to have a conversation, even as a family. So when we want to have couple or family conversations, that's the living room or something else.
Or it could be the kitchen, but not while we're cooking.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to choose the right spot at the right time where you can sit yourself down and open yourself up. We help couples figure out how to do that well.
Wow. I love that.
To add on to that, right? It's the pieces of how do I have a tough conversation with my spouse or my partner without feeling like I'm losing myself.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with the childhood wounds, we feel like we'll lose a piece of who we are, or they'll look down on us, or they will judge us or judge our family because our family did it or whatever.
Yes.
And we want to create a safety for them to be able to realize that, you need to process that so that you can move into a better version of yourself. And, I've heard it over and over again that even as a counselor, you can only go as far as you've worked on your own stuff.
Yes.
Right. I can't help somebody be a better communicator if I suck at communication. Right. Because we are trying to teach what we've already experienced, what we've tried, that we've tried and failed at, or we've, learned this skill and it didn't work for us. So we have that skill in our toolbox because it might work for someone else, but we're probably use the tools that we know work.
Yes.
Because they work for us. And we're practicing the same thing. Going back to that practice thing, when we're asking you or any of our clients to practice to practice something that you learned in session, it's because we're doing it too.
Yeah.
We're not asking people to do stuff we aren't willing to try.
I love that.
Including the vulnerability and talking about the tough stuff. And yeah.
Yeah. And I've said on here 100 times, and I'll say it again. So many times in marriages and in life, we try to impress everybody with our strengths.
Yeah.
And impress them with our knowledge. There's no connection in that. Connection, if you want to make a connection with somebody, it comes through sharing your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses.
Sharing your story.
Sharing your story, putting your guard down. There's never a connection through toughness.
Impress me by how well you can take that wall down.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. To us, that's much more, that's sexy.
Yeah, that's sexy.
When he can be vulnerable and be real and tell me what he's really feeling and experiencing. With that same thing is, we've alluded to it a couple of times in both podcasts, is the team approach, right? Okay, so we do it as a CoTherapy with another couple. But one of the things that Rick and I really have a heart for are doing retreats.
Yes.
And
let's jump into that.
yeah, and when I say retreat, it's a combination of you're going to learn some stuff. You're going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to spend some time working through, processing through some of the tough stuff with your spouse or your partner. But there's also going to be time for laughing and downtime and retreating, truly getting some break and some peace and some a breath of fresh air to breathe together. But we're also going to do it in a team environment. You know, these first responders are already working with each other back to back, arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder.
Yes.
And we would love to be able to take them to a safe place to be shoulder to shoulder in a vulnerable space so that they can learn how to help each other move forward, you know, as a team, so that it's not just Rick and I. We want to do the teamwork and we want to help them. And we, quote, are the experts, unquote, in teaching these skills and doing this work. But if we can teach you and your spouse how to help another spouse through a tough spot, another team through a tough spot, that helps. I mean, that's the way it should work, right? We should all be working together. So when we do these retreats, we do want them to be somewhat smaller groups so that they can learn to be vulnerable with each other, both as the first responder, but also the spouses of the first responder, so that they can connect with other spouses and be able to hold each other accountable and help each other, have each other's backs, work through the tough stuff to say, hey, I'm seeing this. Should I be concerned? Should we talk to a counselor? You know, being able to feel that connection and being able to do that and not feel like they're alone.
Ours is called, the retreat system is called Intimacy Reimagined for Real Connections, or Intimacy Reimagined. But it really is about couples helping couples too, learning how to be a community of people, a community of relational people, so that not only are we good for each other as a couple, we can be better for each other as a unit, with each other as a unit, with our community as a unit, and continue to grow from there. One of our big hopes is that we can better the relational health of our community. Well, we can't do that just sitting in one place.
Yep.
But we can do that as we learn not only to be good together, but to be good as we go out.
I love that. And we're going to end on this episode. And if they will stick around, I'm going to try to do another short one, maybe 20 minutes. And we're going to dive into a retreat, what it looks like, and get into some of the intensive stuff you guys do, because it's not just the 80-minute session. You offer more than that. And I think that's powerful to have. Everybody needs a little bit. Some people need a little bit more, and that's okay. So if you guys don't mind, let's table this and we'll dive into it for next week's. And I want to hear about these retreats and a little bit more of the intensive stuff that our married couples can get in. And thank you guys for having a heart for our military and our first responders right here in Iowa. And again, this is called Real Connections.
Real Connections Counseling, Real Connections Retreats.
Yep. So you can go to their website, which is
realconnectionscounseling.com.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
You got a good voice, man.
Thank you. I think I might change my career and go into singing.
Nice.
Love you guys. We'll see you next week.